My name is Guido Schmidt-Traub. I'm the Executive Director of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. I'm sorry I cannot be with you today in person as you're starting this really important meeting, but I'm pleased and grateful for the opportunity to share some thoughts which I hope will be helpful as you're discussing the implementation priorities for the SDGs in your country, and also, of course, how civil society can promote the adoption. It's been really impressive to see how INFID has taken on the Sustainable Development Goals since their adoption, and we wish you well and look forward to working with you in supporting your efforts. The topics that you're discussing today, in particular financing, data on the Sustainable Development Goals, but also looking at the gender challenges in particular, are of course very important globally, but they're also very important in Indonesia. So I wanted to share some thoughts on the data and financing analyses that we've conducted, which I hope will be helpful as you are continuing your discussions. This year or the next 12 months are of course very important for the implementation of the SDGs. In September we have the Financing Summit that will take place in New York for the Sustainable Development Goals at the United Nations. This is an important opportunity to present plans for financing the goals, highlight gaps, and discuss how these gaps can be closed. Shortly thereafter, your government is hosting the annual meeting of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank in Bali. This is, to my knowledge, the first time these meetings are taking place in Indonesia, and it just underscores the importance of your country in these global discussions. And once again, another hugely important opportunity to discuss these issues and to make practical steps towards mobilizing the necessary financing. We have done a little bit of work on collecting data to take stock of where countries stand in their achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I thought it might be helpful to share some of these emerging conclusions, which we've now published in our annual Sustainable Development Goals Index. The SDG Index is, of course, publicly available on the website sdgindex.org. If we're looking at the summary measure, we've identified the data that's available, and every indicator and every goal has been scored of a scale of 0 to 100. 100 means perfect goal achievement, 0 means worst performance. And so here I've presented an excerpt of some of the summary performances that we have measured for countries. You've got the first 20 top performers on this table, and you see in the first column you see the SDG index score, which goes again from 0 to 100. So Sweden coming in at 85.6 means that it's about 85% towards achieving the goals. That's a high score, but there are significant implementation gaps which we detail in our report, even in Sweden. Indonesia, further to the right, comes in at about place 100. It scores 62.9 out of the goals. So there is a lot of improvement that is possible, and I want to share some thoughts on what the priorities might be, but just wanted to also draw your attention of how this list differs from the list that we're often used to seeing, the rankings that we're used to seeing. In the middle of the slide you have the United States coming in at place 42nd. And this really is a reflection of some of the quite deep sustainable development challenges in the countries that become apparent once you apply a broader lens that the Sustainable Development Goals provide us with. So looking at the Indonesia challenges in a little bit more detail, you have here again the overall rank on the top left. The country ranks 100 out of the 157 countries for which we have data, and that corresponds roughly to the rankings that Indonesia obtains on the Environmental Performance Index and the Human Development Index. You see them in the middle of the table at the center of the slide. The country does rank better on GDP per capita, which is interesting. So it suggests that it does better on the pure economic measures than on the broader sustainable development measures. And this becomes even clearer when we're looking at the Global Competitiveness Index, where Indonesia has made significant progress in recent years and now ranks 39th out of 134 countries for which the data is available. So Indonesia has done well on these performance and on these measures, but clearly it needs to do much better on the Sustainable Development Goals. So let's go to the top right of this chart. You have a small radar chart that describes average performance across the goals. So you see here that Indonesia has done very well on ending extreme poverty in all its form, which is of course goal 1. There are big challenges on goals 2, which is hunger, but also sustainable agriculture and malnutrition, obesity being of course a rising challenge in Indonesia, and then also health, goal number 3. Other big gaps come out on the in industry, innovation, infrastructure, SDG 9. That should be of particular concern for a middle-income country that is seeking to grow out of middle-income country status to achieve high-income status, because we know from experience that, of course, infrastructure, but more challengingly, innovation systems are central for success. And this is where Indonesia clearly has significant challenges. Other goals that stand out are goals 14 and 15, which are the goals on ecosystems, marine and terrestrial ecosystems. And then also under goal 17, we've measured in particular domestic resource mobilization. This is an area where the government is very low. Indonesia only collects about 10.8% of tax revenues as a share of GDP, and this is just way too low for in order to finance the investments that are needed. So this is clearly a massive financing challenge for the country to increase its tax to GDP ratio. Looking at the bottom half of the slide, you have the SDG logos, which you're all familiar with, now color-coded. Depending on how big the challenge are, it ranges from red to orange to yellow and then green. This gives you a sense of where we see the biggest challenges coming out. A goal is scored red if at least 2 indicators are red. So on this measure, we see that goal 2 stands out, and it does so because there is still significant malnutrition in Indonesia. Both stunting and wasting measures are quite high for an upper middle income country, but also the sustainability of agriculture measured by nitrogen emissions needs to be improved. On the health side, a number of, in particularly environmental health concerns stand out, such as air pollution, but there are still significant challenges also on basic measures of health, like access to vaccinations and safe births by women. So this is clearly a major also gender priority, is to make sure that all young mothers receive the medical care that they need to. I'm not going to go through all the other goals. I've already spoken about infrastructure, innovation, and some of the environmental challenges. I thought it was interesting to see that under goal 16, the peace, justice, and strong institution, we see 2 quite different challenges pop up red in the data. And this is on the one hand side, corruption. The corruption perception index in Indonesia is quite high, and should give cause for concern. But then also there is a fairly low share of children whose births are registered officially with civil authority, or putting it differently, there is too high a share of young children in Indonesia that do not have a legal identity. So you will find the full data on our website. We invite you to look at it, to browse it, and to see how it might be useful for framing your discussions on the priorities in Indonesia. We'll be updating this later in the middle of next year, and if you've got any thoughts or comments, please send them to us so that we can make this tool as useful as possible. You have here, just to summarize, the performance across a range of countries in the region, and so this is probably quite a useful tool to then start benchmarking Indonesia's performance. You see that Indonesia is sort of somewhat in the middle of countries in the region. Some of the poorer countries, Cambodia, Laos in particular, perform much worse, but there are also many countries in the region that perform significantly better. And so by looking at the data, you will be able to identify countries that are doing well on the measures where Indonesia is lagging behind, in order to then try and understand how these countries got to the point and what lessons Indonesia might be able to learn. I want to close by just sharing some thoughts on the financing of the Sustainable Development Goals. We have done a fair bit of work on that and would love to work with partners in Indonesia to see how this could be applied at a country level in more detail. Broadly speaking, we've taken the 17 goals and asked the question, first of all, in the first column, what are the major financing needs? And we've identified 8 major clusters. These are health, education, social protection being very difficult to cost at a global level because it is very country specific. But then you could agriculture and food security, infrastructure, biodiversity, small needs for data, and then small needs also for humanitarian work, not in Indonesia principally, but really in other regions, and then in response to natural disasters. If we're looking at the global, these are incremental average annual investments expressed in US dollars. You're seeing that incremental investments for the world lie between 2 and 3% of GDP. This is a significant number, of course, but it is a very small number relative to the benefits that would accrue from achieving the goals. So this includes the goals on climate change, on biodiversity, sustainable urbanization, education, health, and so forth. And so I think any sane observer would conclude that investing these 2.35% or 2 to 3%, I should say, to be a little bit more general, make a good investment. We have also looked, and this is all available on our website, and we can send you the information. We've looked in greater detail what this means for low and lower middle income countries, where the investment needs as a share of GDP, of course, are significantly higher. We have found that private sector investment shares vary across the sectors. They're lowest in the social sector, highest in infrastructure and agriculture. This, of course, comes as no surprise. We have put out some numbers that are really just there for studying and for improvement, to help, we hope, frame the discussion on what minimum ranges of private sector spending might be. What this all shows is that the gaps are and the financing challenges are significant, but they are utterly surmountable given the wealth in the world today. And we hope that your discussions can shine a spotlight on the specific steps that can be taken inside Indonesia. I've already mentioned one, at least according to the data. There clearly is a need to increase tax to GDP ratios quite significantly in the country, but then also to identify what kind of investment needs require international co-financing, particularly in the form of support from the international development banks, including, of course, the World Bank, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and the Asian Development Bank, who are mobilizing significant resources in concessional and non-concessional loan financing to support infrastructure projects in particular. We at the SDSN and our partners in the Indonesia SDSN network will be delighted to work with you to deepen the financing analysis in the run-up to the September SDG Financing Summit. And perhaps there is an opportunity then to discuss Indonesia as a test case, as an example of the financing challenges that need to be met and how they can be mastered. So these are some very quick and I hope hopeful thoughts on some of the challenges which you're discussing. I look forward to getting a report on your meeting and look forward to being in touch with friends at INFID to see how we might be able to help support you drive faster progress in Indonesia, and then also how we can learn from your lessons and share them with other parts of the world. I wish you a wonderful rest of the meeting and look forward to being in touch. Bye-bye.